This is going to be a hip activation and strengthening video. So we're going to start with some activation, and the first one is going to be single leg bridge. If you know that you have hips that aren't activating properly, start with double leg bridge. So you're going to put both feet on the ground, and you're just going to lift up. You want to be driving from your hips. So it's your hips that are doing the movement, not your quads. There's a little bit of pushing down that's going to happen, but really it's lifting. And you really want to make sure that you're getting the full range of motion with hip extension. So this is the end point, not this. So make sure you're doing all the way forward. You'll feel a little stretch in your quads if your quads are tight like mine. You can also put a yoga block between your knees, especially if you're coming back after having a baby or you've had some pelvic pain. That can be a good way to engage the pelvic floor a little bit more. Alternatively, you can also put a band around your legs, and that will help activate the lateral glute muscles here. But you really want to be feeling this at the base of the glutes and hamstrings. If when you do this, your hamstrings cramp, that is a sign that your glutes are not engaging. So squeeze those glutes, and it'll just take a little bit of time to get that movement pattern ingrained. So once you do 10 of these and that feels good, then switch to single leg. And when you go to single leg, you want to make sure that you're not dropping the hip that is not the standing leg. So here I am, keeping the hips level. There's a tendency to want to drop down. Whatever you do in these movements is what you're going to do when you're running too, because this is the same movement that we do when we run. It's extending the hips. And you want it to be coming from the hips, not the quads. Okay, so you want to keep engaged through the core, and then you can also do a march as kind of an in-between single leg and double leg. But you can do a lift here. Just keep the hips level. Okay, from there, you can shift to the side. You're gonna do a sideline leg lift. So you can bend your lower leg just for stability on the floor. And you're gonna stack your hips on top of each other. Make sure that you're not flaring open the hip again. So hips stacked, and then lift the top leg. I like to lead with my heel to make sure that I'm getting the back of the hip, not the hip flexor. For most of us, the hip flexors are plenty strong. They do enough. So leading from the heel. You also want to make sure that you're not hinging at the hip this way. So nice and long, extend through the heel. It's not that much of a range of motion, and you can also see I'm not rocking my hips this way. So nice and still, lifting the leg. Okay, and then you can switch sides. Then from there, you can also do clamshell. So this gets some of the other stabilizers in the hips. So you stack your knees on top of each other, and then you're just gonna rotate. It's also not a big range of motion. You can also do this from the same position as the sideline leg lift. So to keep it a little bit higher. And then even a little bit harder, you can just do that while you're in the same position as the sideline leg lift. Keep the knee here, and then just rotate. Okay, and then finally the next one in this kind of hip stability complex is a knee drive, so a hip drive. So again, just like what we're doing, all the things that we do with running. So we want to be encouraging the muscles to be doing what we want them to do when we're standing. We're just in a different relationship to gravity. So sometimes people will find that this, there's like a little clunk in the hip on the hip that's down. So just go to before where that click might be. But again, that's showing you what might be happening when you're running as well. Okay, another way you can do these to make it a little bit more challenging is to do them from a side plank. So you can do a lift here. You can also do a hip lift here. Anytime you do a side plank, it's good to make sure that you're keeping the lower hip up off the ground. Okay, so next you're gonna stand up and we're gonna do a few hip exercises. So the deadlift is a great activation, and with deadlift, you want to make sure that you are driving from the hips. And before we even go into any kind of exercises, when I say drive through the hips, that means that your glutes are doing the movement. Our glute does this if we're not against gravity, but once we're standing, our glute does this. So with running, when you're landing here, you can either have your quad push down and through, and then your hamstring does this, or you can have your glute activate here, pull you up, and then the hamstring gets to follow through. Our glute is possible to be our most powerful muscle in our body, so we want to use our glute as much as we can. We want to initiate movement from the hip versus initiating through the lower leg or the quad and hamstring. A lot of times when there's injuries with the hamstring, either proximal hamstring tendinopathy or IT band syndrome, even lower leg Achilles things, it can be from hip weakness. So the more we can train driving through the hip, the better. When we sit at work, it makes it harder to use our hips. So doing some kind of wake up is a really good idea. So for deadlift, you can grab any kind of weight, a kettlebell or a dumbbell, whatever you have available, and show it from the front first. You're basically going to be about hip distance apart, maybe a little bit wider than hip distance. You're going to drive down and drive up through the hips. So it's a straight back, the weight is close to your body, and you're going to kind of squeeze the weight in, your armpits together. I'm coming down, my back is straight, and then when I'm coming up, it's just my hips. So you can see my knees are soft, but I'm not squatting. That's a different exercise. We want to be just getting into our hips. So it's as if you're going to touch the wall behind you with your hips. And the only reason that the weight is coming down is because my hips are going back. And then I'm popping up to get the weight back up. Pop up. So we also want to train quickness. So we want the muscles to be firing rapidly. So that's where the pop can become really useful. So you should feel, when you do it, you'll feel a little bit of a stretch in your hamstrings. If your hamstrings are really tight, you will feel a big stretch in the hamstrings. Just go as much as you can. You obviously don't want to feel like anything is ripping, but as you get more mobility in the hips and more strength in the hips, you'll be able to go farther. Okay, so that's double leg kettlebell deadlift. And then a single leg deadlift is going to be the same thing, but you're just going to use one leg. So the standing leg is here, and then the leg going back, I'm going to keep a nice straight back still, coming forward. And I'm just kind of rotating on the hip. And on the other side, so the thing to look for here is to make sure that I'll show it on here, that the non-standing hip doesn't rotate out. So I can go a lot farther if I rotate this way, but I want to be training my hips to be facing forward. So really making sure that I'm getting into this hip to keep it straight. You can see how if I start to rotate out, this hip kind of floats forward. So getting into that hip. And you can even, when you're starting, you can even use your finger as a cue to like push back. The other thing to consider is not to only just be shifting back. That can sometimes be a tendency to just be shifting back this way versus actually driving forward with just kind of up over the foot. So anytime you're doing any kind of lift, you want your full foot on the ground, and you don't want to just be back on your heel. So think about your toes are still loose, you should be able to wiggle your toes, but you're on the ball of the foot as well as the heel and lifting through the arch. So that feels a lot different than just shifting back on the heel. Okay, so you grab the weight, straight back, knees are soft, but I'm hinging at the hip to come forward. And also staying tall through the spine. So if you start to collapse here, that puts a lot of pressure on your back, or if you collapse in the back here, that puts a lot of pressure. So that's partly why we use a weight, is that it helps you stay upright and tall. Okay, so that's that one. And then a lateral squat is another great way to get into the hips. If you have an elastic, you can put that around your knees to start with. So this is just to start to feel what it's like to get your hip over your knees. So as you go lower, you want to keep your hips level as if you're like sitting on a bench and you're just sliding side to side on the bench. And then you can get lower still, sliding along the bench. My hips are moving side to side. I'm staying low versus this. So there's a tendency to want to just go to here. You can see my hip is kind of over there, but I really want to get all the way over so that I could actually lift this leg. So that can be the next step. And you'll feel your core and hips engage. This is my weaker side. Okay, so from there, I would just stay there for now for myself. And then finally, the full lateral squat. You can hold a weight, and you come out and pop up. You're getting, again, into that lateral hip, and then you're powering off of it. And again, when you're doing that, you want to also make sure that your hip is over the knee, or your hip comes, over the foot enough laterally. And then when you come up, you're coming up to full hip extension, not just to here. So a lot of us, me included, spend most of our day sitting, and then when I'm standing, I might feel like I'm in hip extension, but really hip extension is here. And when you do that, and then you adjust to not be arching your back, if your hips are all the way extended and you bring your rib cage in line with it, that engages your core quite a bit more than maybe what your normal standing is. So try to think about that as being where you want to be building strength, because for running, you're putting a lot of load through your body, and you want to be able to withstand that load and be able to absorb the shock through the hips, and then the knees, and then the ankles, not the other way around. The other thing to think about, and why we think weight training is so beneficial, is that because you're putting so much force through your body when you're running, if you increase your ability to lift more weight outside of just running, then when you're running, you're not going to be bumping up against your strength ceiling. So a good measure, a great baseline, is if you can work up to being able to squat your body weight. So if I weigh 150 pounds, that means squatting 150. Additional, that's loading my body 150 pounds. Because whenever you're running, you're putting that much additional force onto all of your joints. So, okay, so then finally, one other one that I like is just a single leg hop. And you can see, you could also do this jump roping. You can start with double leg to feel what it's like. This helps with your tempo and helps you just feel how you should be landing. So stay nice and quiet, and what your body positioning should be as well. So just like I was just mentioning with being that full extension, if your normal posture is here and you try to jump rope, it can feel hard to do. So you want to be up, kind of quick on your feet, allowing your arches to absorb a little bit, but it's not massive calf movement. Still just kind of driven from the hips. So you can feel your glutes engage, and then you can switch to single leg, and make sure that when you do that, you're not just like this, dropping the hip, or like this, not digging into the hip. So you're nice and level, hips are level, knees supported, and it's coming from the hip. And then other side, and you can feel what's different on one side versus the other. And same thing, and push to the side. And then if that's really easy, close your eyes. The other side, close your eyes. And that should help you feel pretty awake in the hips. And then you can either go for your run, or if you have more time in the gym, then that's when you can start doing your squats, your deadlifts with heavier weight. It doesn't have to be a massive workout, but just adding enough weight so that you're actually loading the muscles more. And the range of motion, it's really good to be loading the full amount. It actually helps your form to have weight that you're pushing up against. So you're recruiting more muscle fibers. That's the whole point with adding weight. You want to recruit more muscle fibers so that then they're able to come in and switch through. Then when you're running, you have more muscle fibers available. Okay, that's your little hip activation and workout. Have fun.